Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back, everyone. I am pleased to be interviewing one of our Biz Book Publishing Hub founding partners. Our hub partners are experts who support entrepreneurs along their author journey. Before we dive in, here's a quick word from our sponsor. Today's guest embodies the role of a trusted advisor for creatives, entrepreneurs, and businesses alike. A strategic thinker who understands the power of relationships, she approaches each client holistically, recognizing that they are more than just their legal challenges. Her mission is to help individuals and companies protect their ideas, grow their brands, and most importantly, thrive. With a passion for the arts and entertainment industry, she not only navigates the complexities of copyright and trademark law, but also guides startups and businesses in expanding their ventures. Known for her ability to creatively solve problems, today's guest brings a wealth of experience across multiple fields, including intellectual property and business law, always working to empower her clients to make smart, informed decisions. A frequent lecturer, author, and industry leader, she has earned numerous accolades for her expertise. Her work is centered on making sure clients are protected, well positioned, and able to confidently move forward in their careers and creative endeavors. Today's guest is here to share her insights on the intersection of law, business, and creativity, and how to approach legal matters with a focus on long term success and genuine collaboration. Please join me in welcoming Elissa Hecker. Welcome, Elissa.
Hi, it's so
Elissa,
nice to be here.
we connected. You were actually the very, very first person to fill out my form back in January of 2024 when I first started collecting interest in the BizBook Publishing Hub.
Mhm.
I'm grateful someone shared that information with you because being a creative, we don't always think about these questions of IP and contracts and such. And so, knowing right away we had someone with your expertise in our community just sort of helped me know I can turn to you or refer to you. I'm curious, how did you come to provide these services specifically for authors as opposed to other people in the world who need legal representation?
It's a very good question. I've had my practice for 20 years, and I started out in the music business. When I went out on my own, I just expanded. So, the first person who comes to you who has a question, go through, it was an author. I had collaboration issues between authors and illustrators, had a lot of publishing agreements. So just over the years, you put out your name, people know who you are by reputation, and then just more and more and more come in. And I love working with our authors. I love being able to teach authors who usually, especially in the beginning, like to jump into, oh, I got a contract, this is great, I'll just sign it, and teach them everything's negotiable. You want to know, teach them about rights, about what to reserve, what you may want to use, and to really help be an educator so that in the next negotiation phase, they've got it. They know what to look for. They know how to go forward. They know how to be stronger. I just love that.
Do you have any examples of the kind of problems people come to you with and that you had, like you were just talking about, sort of collaboration issues? Give us some examples so people know the kind of problems that you solve for authors.
Sure. Well, in the author realm, very often when you're initially, if you're writing a book that's not a straight fiction book, anything that historical, biographical, autobiographical, or a book that's like your calling card for your business, you may be working with a ghostwriter, or B, you may be working with teams. So you want to make sure that in that collaboration agreement, everybody understands what role they play, what are the obligations, what are the payments, things like that. In terms of nonfiction, I do pre-publication review for authors, which involves reading the manuscript and talking about potential defamation, right of publicity and privacy. What are some other things that might come up and how to avoid those pitfalls? Because when you get into a publishing agreement, the publisher makes you warrant that you've already done this and indemnify the publisher. So if the publisher sued for copyright infringement or defamation or something, the author has to pay for the defense of the publisher. So I go through all of that with authors as well. And obviously the publishing agreements. I do review of publishing agreements and negotiations for authors. And that goes through self-publishing, hybrid publishing, and traditional publishing.
Everybody needs it, is basically what you're saying.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
It's good. And it's good to issue spot to figure out, because a lot of folks will read it, and the publishing agreements are old, especially the traditional ones. They were written like 100 years ago, it seems like. So there's a lot of intricacies that go into them, and it's important for authors to really understand what they're agreeing to.
It is hard because
Uh,
we're not trained to read the legalese. And somehow
yeah.
it turns out that when things are most important, they're bold and all uppercase, which makes it impossible to read a dense paragraph of text. So this is the
Yeah.
most important part of the contract, and I'm like reading it out loud just to try to get my brain to hear
Yeah.
it, and I'm still not able to hear it because it's not readable. So it's
Right.
just
And
funny.
sometimes it's not really bold, those really important parts, and your eyes can go over them. So unless you know to look for it, it can escape you.
hmm I listen to some nonfiction where they mention people's names, whether it's a client they worked with, or someone they learned from, or it's more of a memoir
Mhm.
or that kind of experience. How do we safely and legally acknowledge someone else's role in our life? And I mean, for me, I just decided to use pseudonyms for
Mhm.
my clients. Some of them were specific people in mind. Some of them were sort of a mix of a few different clients to make a point. But if I thought they were even a little bit something that someone would recognize in themselves, I
That's
actually
key.
shared with that
Yep.
person, I did this thing, and by the way, you're Susan in the final
Mhm.
version. You're not your name. Just kind of a little heads up so they're not caught off guard. But
Yeah.
what could authors do to bring their stories to life, add that realism, but also not open themselves up to, I don't know, some kind of legal issue?
It's a good question. I just had this conversation with a client this week. First, I want to give the disclaimer: this is not legal advice generally, but in thinking about how to do it, obviously anything positive is usually good. But like you said, it's good to let folks know. Memoirs have a little bit more wiggle room, because you could say, in my opinion, or this is how I felt. So it gives you a little bit more wiggle room than a straight nonfiction, which is why sometimes it's more preferable if I have authors who are like, no, this is really more autobiographical. I say, but if you write more as a memoir, you may have more leeway in terms of how you express things. I always recommend, when possible, to get releases from the folks who you're mentioning, especially if by name. Um, I also always recommend get rid of the smaller characters, I would say, or the ones who don't necessarily add as much to the story or the narrative. It's really good, and very often an editor will help do this. But when you're writing, you don't have to mention every single person who was in your second grade class. You could just mention the person who was in the story and maybe change the name if there might be a question. There are also things to wonder. You may think that what you're writing is positive, but if you look at it objectively, would that person think so? I had a client recently who wrote about a woman who back in the 90s was having, was dating her boss in this media organization. And he's like, I don't know why that would be a bad thing. I'm like, but for her career, now or then, like, she might not think that that was a good thing to be out. And is there a reason why? Like, do you have to use her name? Is that integral to the story? And it really wasn't. So it's a lot of coaching and trying to figure out what really works and what doesn't. Obviously, if you're talking about someone who is abusive, or um, someone who had criminal charges. So, for example, in the case of defamation, which is a legal tort, or the rights of publicity or the rights of privacy, truth is a defense. So if someone had been arrested, there's a record, you can see the evidence. You can't be sued for defamation. I mean, you can be sued for defamation, but you can be found innocent of that, or not liable for that, rather. However, there are other things to consider, like rights of privacy, rights of publicity, that even if that was a truth, could it potentially get in the way of them finding a job? In which case, you might be found liable on that court. but not defamation. So there's a lot of things to balance, and it really depends on the individual manuscript.
I think people listening are like, "Oh."
Yep.
What if, like, given that example you just had about the woman who was dating the boss, what if the name is changed, but the circumstances aren't, and anyone who worked there would absolutely know?
Would absolutely know. Yeah. So there's a threshold standard that you have to weigh. Like I provide a risk reward analysis basically. And it's the reasonable person kind of standard objection, would you think it, let me backtrack. There's a difference if there's someone who's famous versus not famous. There's a different standard. There's also, if it's just like 4 or 5 people who might know and they're all out in the world now and they may or may not read the book versus like a lot of people who maybe in this person's life would know, oh my gosh, that's you. So it's like an object. It it really, the problem is it depends on the circumstances. I have to be like a lawyer. It really depends
It sounds really
on the specific area.
subjective.
Yeah.
It sounds subjective, and that the author, of course, is looking for a reason to use the name or to use the
Right.
example with or without the actual name.
Right.
And so they're always going to side on they're going to err on the side of it's probably okay, right? And
Hmm.
the lawyer is the objective one who says,
Exactly.
well, let's look at this from this 3 other angles, and then, choose your level of risk versus reward for
Yeah.
telling this story or using this name. So we talk about this a lot in the world of speaking and writing. Storytelling is so
Hmm.
powerful, and we want our stories to be based on examples. That's
Hmm.
often the case, that what brings our how to to life. So not just a list of steps, but to illustrate how people have used
Yes.
our steps
Yeah,
and
and
got.
you don't want to lose the sense of narrative just by adding in extra names or characters. And this is one of my other clients, it's interesting, came from a journalism background and is now writing a memoir. And the standards for writing in journalism are very different. And so they were like, well, I had releases for this. I'm like, but that was for when it was published in the newspaper. This is very, it's a lot of somewhat retraining that it doesn't transfer over. It's a whole different set of facts and a whole different set of laws.
When someone gets the opportunity to work with a traditional publisher, the author or the would-be author often feels like they hit the jackpot,
Mhm.
because, it's like grabbing the brass ring on the
Yeah.
carousel. Like, you think, "Oh my gosh." The thing is, if you don't let go of the brass ring, you fall off the horse. So, it's not always good to grab
Mhm.
it. It may or may not be released. So, Alyssa, what are some pitfalls that an author who's excited in that moment needs to be asking themselves, and at what point should they contact someone like you to help them navigate the next steps?
So, very good question. Again, it depends. First of all, do you have an agent? Because an agent usually helps act as your first advisor, which is always good. I, as an attorney, will review the actual agreement and talk to you about what's in that. But the agent will have an idea of, is this publisher good for your purposes? Is this the audience? Like, does this publisher know the audience that you want? Things like that. And usually serves as some kind of a vetting process. If, like, I have a client, for example, who came to me who was provided an offer letter from a major publisher. She wasn't shopping around a book, but she is a very successful business person, a big following on social media, and she was approached. So she's like, I don't know what to do. So at this point, I'm stepping in as her advisor in that point and going over the offer terms and everything. So when you first get it, a lot of things, there are some key things that I'd want a client to look at. First of all, what are the deadlines? So what else is going on in your life? Did you already complete the manuscript? Do you have to write the manuscript? Are you taking care of a sick parent? Do you have kids in elementary school? Are you working on 19 other projects? Do you have a full-time job and are you traveling? Can you make the deadlines that are laid out in the agreement? That's super important because if you miss them, that could be a real problem. What's the advance situation? Is it an advance that's large enough that can sustain you where you want to give up some other work and this is what you would be doing for a certain particular time. Um, does it take years to recoup? Like, will you ever see a royalty in the future? What is the royalty structure? And so importantly, the publishing companies will want to take all rights, period, rights to movie production, rights to all different languages, rights to the ebooks, rights to everything. I wouldn't want to have a publisher shop around my book to a movie studio. I'd want to have someone who's involved in the film business work on that. So there are certain things that you want to carve out immediately and things that you want to think about and things you want to negotiate. So I think these are some of the biggest things. Know your rights, understand if there's an advance, what it is and what's the structure around it. And the timing, I think, of the deliverables is really key. And also, if there's illustrations or cover illustrations or things like that, are you being assigned an illustrator? Do you get to bring in a collaborator? You get to pick your editor. There's a lot of different things, because a lot of what happens in a book is not just the one author. It really is a team effort, and you have to be comfortable with your team and feel like your team is really doing the best for you. And I hate to say your personal brand, but a lot of this is your name on this book. When they say they're going to do publicity, for example, what does that mean? Does that just mean shipping out books and putting up a sign, or are they actively going to be doing things for you? So I think in the very beginning, I like to sit down with my clients and say, what are your questions? What do you want? And just as importantly, what don't you want?
This is really helpful to hear, because I feels like in that moment they're so overwhelmed by
Yes.
the opportunity that it's hard to push back or even stop to ask those
Yeah.
questions. I recently was introduced to an author who was surprised that she had to get her own endorsements for the book. The
Mm-hmm.
endorsements being the advanced praise that gets
Yep.
written inside the book or maybe on the back cover. And I thought, how did that not how you didn't, like,
It's in the
wow,
contract. Yeah.
she did not know,
Yep.
and I'm like, I don't think that it's standard that a publisher would go get that for you, like, you are the one who knows the
Right.
right people to ask, and she was feeling really overwhelmed by not know she thought, "I
Mm-hmm.
don't know the right people to ask, they picked me, so
Yeah.
they must know people," and I was like, "No." So I think there's also a lot of misunderstandings on the author's part about what do publishers do, and this is also true for hybrid publishers as
Mm-hmm.
well as traditional. The assumption about who's doing what marketing, that piece you just touched
Mm-hmm.
on, is really important. The piece that I focus on with authors is the launch, and specifically building a launch team of likely prospects and referral partners
Mm-hmm.
with the goal of getting 50 or more Amazon reviews. And I have my reasons for why I think this is
Mm-hmm.
really, really important. And it comes after the book's getting published. It's like we're building a launch team, then the book comes out, then we
Yep.
load it up with all those reviews, and then we have all the rest of the publicity. And a lot of times that step is skipped or not even thought about for
Yeah, and
publishers.
you're paying for it. I mean, that's the thing with the self or hybrid publishing. You're paying to have your book published. The publisher should be, you should know exactly, it should be defined. What is it? I love that you have that well defined. So they have the expectation of what you're doing, and then they know, the authors know what they should be or could be doing as well, in addition to.
The best thing I heard from someone in the BizBook Publishing Hub, because I now have met with, I don't even know how many
Mm-hmm.
dozens of hybrid publishers, assisted self publishers, and the variations of people who help people get
Yeah.
books published. And he said the publisher's job is to publish your book,
Mm-hmm.
period. And anything else we expect of
Yep.
them is a gift. Like if they give us anything more than getting your book published, that means they're doing extra. But we should not go into those relationships assuming that they're going to do any kind of PR or media or press, like,
Yeah,
or
but I think
launch.
that depends on the publisher,
It
because there
does.
are some who
Base
yeah, but you should know. Yep.
baseline, their job is in their name.
Yeah.
They published your book. That's the part they're really good at. And there are other people who do really, really thoughtful PR strategy around
Mm-hmm.
books, but don't publish them. So it's like this
Right.
is where it can get really confusing. You think you've got a one-stop shop, and they help you tremendously, but they may not do all the things. Some of
Yeah.
them might. And this is where if you have the patience to shop around for a publisher, hybrid or otherwise, you will, see the variations and be able to choose wisely. But it can really be impatient, I think, because the publishing process for particularly a traditionally published book is a very long
Mhm.
timeline. It could feel like, oh, I don't want to push this off any further to do some shopping around, but you may get a better outcome.
Yeah, and I also see clients who come in who have been found or who have agents who shop them around who have really large like Instagram following, social media following. And they're like, "Oh, this is our only opportunity. We need to hit it now." And I've been like, you need to negotiate, you need to think about it. And I've had some clients in the past who have been like, "No, we just want to sign." And then a year later they come back and they're like, "Well, we're not happy with what they're doing." I'm like, you had the contract. Like, you can't go back and redo the contract. And they're like, but they're not doing this and they're not doing that. I'm like, we went through this. It's not really, and I told you so. I think it's more of a lesson learned for next time that everything is negotiable. You can't get everything you want by any stretch of the imagination, especially if you're a first time author. But it's always good to, like we said earlier, ask the questions and at least get the information so that you're informed. And sometimes it's okay to walk away from a contract. If this one wants you, so will someone else and potentially on better terms. And that's really scary for authors sometimes.
Especially if they think success for a book means not being self-published, because of course
Mm-hmm.
self-publishing is now always the option.
Yeah.
So you can spend a year or two looking for other opportunities to get your book out there
Mm-hmm.
and then decide, you know what, I'm just going to do this.
Yeah.
And that's all, doesn't mean your book won't go out into the world, but you will be in control of it. I'd love to hear any like things to keep our wits about when working with a hybrid publisher. I say that because as I've met with all these hybrid publishers for the BizBook
Mm-hmm.
Publishing Hub, I noticed that there is not a clear definition of what that even means.
Mm.
So I was introduced to the term assisted self-publisher,
Hmm.
and I assisted self-publishing and hybrid publishing has a very big overlap in my mind
Yeah.
because not all hybrid publishers give you the imprint. They don't
Mm-hmm.
really publish under their name.
Right.
Some publish under their name, but you're paying them and you're still in control of the book. Some will want to do some sort of agreement around percentages.
Mm-hmm.
Some you just pay them, they publish it, and you own everything. So what have you seen in the world of hybrid publishing that people should be aware of? What questions could be people be asking?
Yeah, I've definitely seen all the above with the exception of the assisted publishing, which sounds like assisted living. It's not the best term. But I would say some of the agreements I've seen, and these are not the more established ones, look like they're cut and paste agreements from the internet, which makes me very uncomfortable. And very often I just have to rewrite them or really just counsel the clients, be aware of this or that, because they don't make sense. And it's like they're grabbed from various different kinds of publishing agreements. And that can be very dangerous for the author. Um, Other than that, it's really just know what it says, know what the expectations are, know what you're paying for, know what you're getting in response in as a result, because some of the hybrid publishers are really asking you to pay a lot up front. And I also would say, do installments. Make sure, just like when you're dealing with a general contractor, don't pay the last installment until you are satisfied, you have the final product, and it's not just delivered, it's accepted, satisfactorily accepted. So they can't say, we've shipped out the book, it's at your doorstep, it's at the post office. It has to be satisfactorily accepted by me in order for me to pay the last installment.
I love
And
that.
that gives them more of an impetus to do it right. There are a lot of great hybrid publishers. There are a lot of not great hybrid publishers and a lot of cons out there also, or people who really don't know what they're doing. So I think it is important always to ask a lot of questions.
I've definitely heard some horror stories about people who, and again, it might just be they're over their skis. They don't know what they're
Yeah.
doing,
Yeah.
not so much they're trying to
They think it's
con
easy,
people.
but it's really not.
And they get into the world and they say, "Oh, I'm a hybrid publisher,"
Mm-hmm.
and they hang a shingle and then they advertise to an audience that really wants their book published. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a vulnerability for first time authors who
Yep.
are overeager to get their word out and who who will grab at that first opportunity. So I
Mhm.
mean, part of what I'm hearing is like slow down, pay attention,
Yes.
read, get expert advice,
And
and
also make sure there is a contract, because I've seen some where they're like, "Oh, we're going to do this for you." I'm like, if there's nothing in writing, you don't, not even walk away, run away, because that's not going to happen.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's really good. And is there anything in particular that self-published authors need to be thinking about when they're the ones getting the ISBN and uploading
Mhm.
KDP? What are some of the legal issues other than what we talked about
Yeah.
mentioning people's names? What else might come up in that journey?
It's a good question. I think it's the same questions that come up in any kind of publishing agreement. Um, are you infringing on anything? We talked about the defamation, but even if it's fiction, that usually would be an infringement. Are you working with collaborators? So it's all the same. I think, are you registering it with the Copyright Office properly? Because usually, like, the publisher will take care of that, but you want to make sure you're doing that correctly. Um,
Which, by
I
the
don't.
way, I didn't know about that step.
Mhm,
Registering with the Copyright Office, was something that, like, I did not have the capacity to pull off my first time because I
mhm.
learned about it sort of too late in the process. What is the purpose behind getting your book registered with the Copyright Office?
It's huge. So, under the Constitution, you have the copyright law of the United States. And what happens is, if you register it with the Copyright Office, which is a very easy process, it costs, I think, $65 at this point. It's a user friendly government site, and they have really good people on the end of the phones. If you have questions, if someone infringes upon it or copies it or does something with your work, you are able to sue for statutory damages, which could be like $150,000 per infringement rather than actual damages, which might be $10, if a copy was sold. If you win an infringement case, are entitled to attorney's fees. So if you don't register it, you are not allowed to bring a case in federal court for copyright infringement. So it's really important, really inexpensive, and insurance, because it also says this is my original work and it was as of this date, and you had access, and then if you have to go through the copyright infringement process, you have evidence that is considered evidence that it is yours. So
That
it's
I mean,
huge.
that feels like something that is specifically for self-publishers because we don't have
Yeah.
someone telling us what to do and
Yeah.
or doing it for us. There's definitely a I don't know whether to call it a rumor or a myth, but that if I just publish something, it's copywritten. So like, what's that about?
So yes, and if I go into the improv world, anything that is an original fixed in a tangible medium is protected by copyright. That's it, under the law. However, in order to enforce that copyright, you have to have a registration.
Got it. So you can't bring a suit on federal court if you don't have it registered.
Yes, you
Even
have to have it registered either prior to the infringement or within a certain amount of time from discovering the infringement.
can you copyright register a book after it's been published, or does it have to happen
Yes.
before?
Yeah, you can have, there are two categories. There's the unpublished category and the published category. The unpublished category actually has longer protection. The published category is the author's life plus, and or if it's a company that owns it, there are different qualifications. Um, but it's, in certain circumstances, I would recommend doing registration for the unpublished and then the published. And then anything that comes from that is considered a derivative work. So if somebody takes like fan fiction and changes it, that's considered a derivative work. And normally they would have to get a license for it. So those are things that go into your thought process too.
I'm going to be asking you to send me some links that we can put in the show notes for people who want to
Absolutely.
check out all these resources that our government has to protect us here in the
Yes.
US. Are there similar types of laws for other countries that people should be looking for?
Yes. It's interesting. Europe primarily has our similar to when we have reciprocity with a lot of countries around the world under various different conventions and treaties. But Europe has what's called moral rights, which we only have for very limited capacity for visual artists. And moral rights enables you to say, I don't want you to do this because I disagree with how you're using it. We don't really have that other than a very small category of visual artists under the Visual Arts Rights Act in this country and in New York, particularly. But US copyright is based on economics, and a lot of the European countries were based on the morality of the creator and how the creator uses the work. So yes, there are copyright acts in almost every country in the world, and there's a lot of reciprocity.
So wherever you're listening from, take a look on Google for what the resources are in your country, so that you're protecting the work that you're writing and the work that you're publishing. This also would be a way. I've heard people say, I don't want to share my writing as I'm writing the book. I'm
Mm-hmm.
afraid someone will steal my idea.
Mm-hmm.
So if they were to register the unwritten work, the concept,
Unpublished work. Yeah.
unpublished
Yep.
work, that would be a way for them, because they're like, well, I want to work with this collaborator, or I want to
Yep.
work with this illustrator, but I don't want them to steal my ideas. That would be a way
Right.
to protect
Well,
against that.
just also as a fact, ideas are not protectable by copyright. The expression is. So you can't, for example, protect an ideal of two star-crossed lovers or things that are pretty common in stories, but it's how you're expressing it. So if folks are talking about the methods of expression, you also have ways of doing it. Like you could have non-disclosure agreements and collaboration agreements that protect the confidentiality of what's happening between the two of you. You don't always have to just register to do that. You can also have other ways of protecting, contractual ways of protecting your work.
I feel naive about this because I feel like the people I would want to work with,
Mhm.
I wouldn't need the NDA, right? But you
Yeah.
probably are seeing the dark side of humanity and would say, well, that's a good idea, but in
Yeah.
practice, let's protect you.
Yes.
And I think
But
that's
also
where
with
we begin.
non-disclosure agreements, they can be mutual. So if you have
Mhm.
collaborators coming in and talking about ideas, it doesn't. I like to do egalitarian agreements. I like to do easily understandable in English agreements so that everybody understands you're both parties are being protected. So it's kind of like you're dating and you're about to get into marriage, but you haven't worked together yet, so you don't know. So these are the initial conversations. You have this little bit of protection here. And if it's not something that you want to do, you go your separate ways, but I can't use your stuff. You can't use my stuff. And that sometimes just makes it easier.
So you were the first to sign up for the BizBook Publishing Hub when it was really just a twinkle in my eye. I had met with maybe, oh gosh, maybe a dozen people between December and mid-December and mid-January, to understand. I was doing research calls, trying to understand whether my solution around launch strategies was
Mhm.
unique and whether a referral network that I was looking for existed. And I learned by the 12th call that it was unique, and people wanted to know how to join one a referral network that
Yep.
they wanted me to create. So I put up a Google form, and you were the first to fill it out. And you and I hadn't actually met about it. We met after you filled it out.
Mhm.
What attracted you to signing up and made you realize, like, oh, I don't even know Robbie that well. This just sounds like exactly the kind of place I want to be hanging out.
Well, when I first heard you talk about it, I think it was in a networking group. And it sounded like such a duh moment. Like there isn't one. Of course it should be. And it's great. And I knew I wanted to be part of it because I knew it was going to be great. And I also have now been able to refer. So I have so many clients who are business people who are writing business books. And I know that in this group, for example, there are a lot of experts for PR, for editing, for publishing, for whatever. I have sent so many people to you and to this group because I know that they're going to be taken care of in ways that I can't take care of them, but I know that they will be taken care of with good people who really know what they're doing and that they have a choice because there's a lot of folks who do similar things, but in very different ways. So I'm a huge proponent of relationship building and really getting to know each other. And it's an opportunity to be like, is this someone with whom I would work well? If not, this person may be. And everybody kind of brings in a different strength. So I thought it was a really great idea. And I had also never seen anything like this before. And I didn't have to build it. So I really appreciated that you did.
I was willing to just not, join someone else's if it existed, but it didn't. So
It's a lot of
I
work.
put it
Yeah.
together. It's been amazing. And just as you've mentioned, we have more than 50 hub partners,
Hmm.
and they range from helping with writing, editing, publishing, all the way through various types of marketing. There's also people who do coaching for the business building that goes with writing a
Hmm.
book. So it's an incredible resource. And I think one of the most valuable things that's happened is that hub partners have identified a select number of other partners that they regularly refer to, so that these are people you get to know. And
Hmm.
I have been hosting these monthly events. One month will be just for hub partners. The next
Hmm.
month will be public for writers and authors to meet each other and the hub partners. Have you been able to attend those? Have you been meeting people through that, or maybe through Zoom
Yes.
calls? Tell me a little bit about how you've been networking your way
Yeah,
through
I've
this.
attended, I want to say more than half of them. I've actually brought in some self-publishers, small hybrid publishers to it too, because I think they should be part of it, and I think that it's a really great community. Also for small businesses to talk to each other, because it's very important to have a collaborative process where people are dealing with the same issues. Um, so they've been good. So the breakout rooms are really interesting. It's fascinating to find out how many different facets of publishing there really are. I see my portion, but like I was saying earlier, how many people go into a successful book? It is an absolute team, and it's really been interesting meeting the folks from all over the country who work in very specific areas, and trying to figure out how we can all work together.
Yeah, I think part of what happens as a writer is you peek in and realize, like you said, the range of
Hmm.
support that's out there, and makes you go, "Do I need Oh, I
Yeah.
might need that.
Yep.
Oh, I might need that too."
Yeah.
And you didn't
Because
even know
also you
those
want to
roles
be able to
existed.
focus on writing and delivering the best
Mhm.
possible work. You don't want to have to think about, PR on social media and the metrics. Somebody knows how to do that. You can focus on writing, let somebody else take care of that. Because otherwise, trying to do everything is just impossible and a real distraction from the actual quality of the work.
In a minute, I'm gonna ask you my wrap-up question, which is, what advice do you have for writers and/or authors who are looking to write a book to help them grow a business? And it may be a reiteration of your top 3 points from earlier, or maybe there's something else you haven't had a chance to say. But first, we're gonna hear another quick word from our sponsor. So, what advice do you have for the person who's writing a book that will help them grow a business?
Uh, in general, I would say figure out the why. What in terms of growing a business, are you also looking to be a speaker? Are you looking to use this to go into businesses? And if you're coaching, for example, you're handing out the book to the folks who you're coaching. Are you looking to become a best-selling author? So I think the why behind it's very important, because that will also inform how you do it, what goes into your collaboration agreements, what goes into your publishing agreement, and then what goes into the PR and the marketing and all that stuff afterwards.
That's great.
Um, Also, do you ever think you're going to do? Are you doing this with the idea of a movie deal? Who's going to play you in the, things, all the things like that for the future? Um, do you have time to do it? Is a really big deal, because so many people are like, I'm going to write a book, but it's a real commitment. You have to put everything else aside. And do you have the right team around you? Because you really need supportive family, friends, folks at work, and then your publishing team, your
Yeah.
editing team, a good editor is one of your best friends. You absolutely need. So trusted advisors.
I
And then
tell
know that everything is negotiable. So ask for the moon and know what your definites are that you must have and what you absolutely
that last point. Everything's negotiable
don't.
until you sign the contract, and then not so
No,
much.
even then afterwards. A lot of people think that, but as long as both sides agree to a change or an amendment or something, that's fine.
You just don't have as much
Yeah.
leverage, though, if
Yes,
you didn't
correct.
think to ask ahead of time, and now you're
Correct.
in the
But if you're
process.
continuing in a relationship and like life happens, you're already in that relationship. So if you have to extend a deadline or do something it's workable if you're with the right people.
And if you, I think, tell people, right? Don't
Yeah.
don't wait to the last second and then be running late.
Yeah.
When, because life does sometimes go sideways. I've said to some prospects who've reached out to me about their launch, they don't even have a book written yet. I
Mm-hmm.
always say, listen, I'm not a writing coach, I'm not a developmental editor, but I am a strategist.
Mm-hmm.
So if you meet with me, I will absolutely help you identify what book to write,
Yep.
whether you have the audience, how to identify and build that audience, and then I can connect you with people who can help you write the book. Because, like you said, that why piece is
Yeah.
so important, that if they get that figured out, by the time they come to me for the launch and I'm saying, well, how does this book help you support and grow your business?
Mm-hmm.
What is the offer that readers can go to after reading your book? It'll all be lined up and make
Yep.
sense. And so the pipeline it's all worked out.
And that makes your job easier.
It's so much harder
Yep.
when someone comes to me with a book that they hit publish, they however they did it,
Yep.
hybrid publishing, self-publishing, they hit publish, they don't have this all figured out,
Yeah.
and now they're a little bit in a panic, and they're like, "Well, the book's not selling, it's not giving me any money for my business."
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, "Okay, like, what was
Yeah.
the dotted line between these 2 projects?"
Yep.
So yes, the more you can do this up front, it'll serve the business owner
Yeah.
well.
I think it
So
also makes for a better book because you have in your mind the
yep.
purpose behind why you're sharing this information.
Yeah, particular audience member, like who am I
Yeah.
writing to, all of that. This has been great. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you're like, I'm dying to tell you this one thing that people always want to know? Is there anything
Actually,
else?
yes. Believe it or not, I'm glad you just asked that. You cannot trademark the title of a book, and a lot of people ask that, but you can trademark a series. So,
Mhm.
like the Harry Potter series. So, if you do end up writing more than one book, the title of the series may be protectable under trademark law. So, that's a different area than copyright law, but it can also improve the protection of your brand.
That's awesome. I did know that. I have gone the route of, get the URL, get interviewed on the topic everywhere, publish other content on my
Yep.
topic. Basically, if you were to look on Google for networking and
Mm-hmm.
croissant or networking and bagel, this is my first book, you're going to find
Yep.
me as the originator of that concept. Now, the concept itself is well before me. I just gave it a
Mm-hmm.
name, right? Like
Right.
nothing new under the sun. I gave it a name, and it's attached to me, but I wanted the idea to be able to float out there.
Mm-hmm.
When NPR interviewed me, I was finding people talking about it in Germany, and it's so
That's awesome.
good that people in the audience will take a picture of the slide or
Mm-hmm.
the trainers talking about it and then post about it on LinkedIn. And then I'm like, "Hi, I'm so glad you liked that. By the way, you might want to check out my book and my TEDx, my
Yep.
this, my that." Because it's really hard for people to know who originated an idea like that. And so
Yeah.
I didn't want to get into trademarking it because I thought I don't want people not to use it. I just don't want
Right.
to fight
Well,
about it, but I
but
want to
as
own
the
it.
trademark owner or the copyright owner, you have the ability to control how it's used. So if you want people to be able to use it to promote you,
Hmm.
that's fine. If they start using it for their own goods that are
Right.
potentially there's an issue of consumer confusion. Is it theirs or yours? That's when you come in and say, you need to stop.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I just kind of tried to own the idea universally, but it's funny. Like I trademarked one thing in my business and then I end up letting it go.
Hmm.
So it's
Well,
it's
it's not always the right time. It really depends on,
yeah.
again, it depends on the purpose. It depends on
This
what
is
you
where
need.
having a conversations with folks like you is so
Yeah.
helpful to understand. Because otherwise I've heard people get an idea and then immediately want to trademark it. They have no history of using it. They don't
Oh,
even know if it's useful.
yeah.
And I'm like, "You're just spending a lot of money." Like, I
You're
don't know.
spending a lot of money and a lot of time, and you don't get that money back if you don't use it. It's
Right.
definitely that's the thought. And also, if somebody else is already using it and you haven't done your full research, you're going to be rejected outright. But it's definitely a thoughtful process that I like to. I ask a lot of questions of my clients
Mhm.
before we ever move to the application process for registration.
I'm glad we touched on
Yeah,
all this. We were mostly focusing on the other parts of publishing.
yeah.
So how can listeners find you and follow your work?
Well, thank you for asking. My website is eheckeresq.com. So that's eheckeresq.com. And all my contact information is on that. And I don't know, I just love working with creatives. I'm in New York, but I have clients all over the country, and happy to talk to anyone who has questions.
Elissa, we're going to put all kinds of links, including to your LinkedIn, your website, in the show notes, which you'll find at bizbookpublishinghub.com, which is also where you'll find all those hub partners that we've mentioned who are waiting to guide you through your author journey, and the show notes. And also, we host the free virtual networking event for writers and authors 6 times a year. Go to bizbookpublishinghub.com to find all of that, and look forward to seeing you all at the next episode. Elissa, thank you so much.
Thank you.